All right, here we are. Welcome back to Book Wave, the book club podcast. If you're new around here, you can check out our website at www.bookwave.club. Today we're looking at Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, Rules 7 and 8 today. Today I'm joined by PatMan and Will, and the first rule is pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. What was the biggest impact this chapter had on you guys?
I think the biggest takeaway for Rule 7 was learning how to let go of everything and actually understand what you're capable of, doing in your life. And it's really hard to. It's really hard to make that kind of sacrifice and just understand and listening to your internal self telling you, okay, this is what I was meant to do, but why do I have so many other things going on that are taking hold of my life? And how do I get rid of it?
He really talks about the whole life equals suffering thing, what you hear from almost any religious icon.
And I guess that's the other thing that most people today are having trouble with. They don't want to suffer through change, but they have to. Sometimes they rather just stay in their own comfort zone, so to speak, and not go out and pursue something new.
Without repeating myself too much, I'd like to say that this is one of the things I struggle with the most. I feel like every time I say this, I've said it for every rule, and I'm just a really destitute poor man who can't even think.
It's worth repeating every once in a while.
But yeah, so this is, you've got your ego, which craves to be desired and satisfied, and your comfort zone, which sort of metaphysically wants you to stay within it. And then there's what is meaningful, and there's that higher self and that version of perfection, that body of Christ, whatever you want to call it, that walking with God that is so hard to reach. And it is a struggle that I think everyone faces. And I think in North America especially, it's not really sold to us that we shouldn't pursue what is meaningful. We should just pursue what is expedient. And that is consumer society, right? Like we've got Netflix, we've got Uber, we've got what's that app? I live in a small town, so I don't actually have half the things that I'm about to say we have. Uber Eats.
Skip the dishes.
That's the one. Skip the dishes. We've got all these things, and it's so easy to just not leave your house and stare at a screen and drop into trance and watch 15 episodes. Like I saw a tweet yesterday. Someone was thirsty, so they ordered $15 of pop from Domino's just so they didn't have to go to the corner store. And this is the hard thing. Like I would wish that I had stretched yesterday. I wish that I had done yoga yesterday. Am I doing yoga right now? Am I stretching right now? Am I journaling? Am I scheduling myself appropriately?
Hey man, you always have time.
Absolutely. And
time is money.
Okay, and other platitudes. But the thing is, it's a lot easier to just watch a new episode of The Flash, or to watch Rick and Morty, or to go to the corner store and buy a bunch of cookies and eat them all in 30 seconds and then wish you had more cookies. And so this is the hard battle that I think we're facing in our generation. We don't have a war. We don't have a depression. We are just stuck trying to find and actualize ourselves.
And that's the thing, too. Once we go through the easy stuff, we get bored and we end up searching for something else. And once we end up searching thousands of times over the course of several hours or days, just like swiping left, swiping right, scrolling up and down our social media feed, we end up feeling like we're completely drained and we don't know what to do. And when we don't know what to do, we are desperate. And when we become desperate, we end up becoming lost. So the way that Peterson describes finding something meaningful to do is by simply taking some time to sit down and ask yourself, what are you capable of? And I've had moments like that where just finding something to do, like I know that I'm interested in other occupations. I like to learn a lot of things, but at the end of it all, I'm just a writer. I like to write stories. And given the current climate in the West right now, it's almost as if I'm being caved in. And if I don't pursue this path of writing this novel and publishing it to the world, then what's the alternative? So that's what Peterson perfectly describes too. I know that you two have the books, but I have the audiobook, and listening to him on the audiobook just describing that is it just hits you in the chest too. He brings up parables from the Bible, of course, but just the way he describes it, it's very impactful. And plus, when he ends the chapter, if any of you have the audiobook, you can tell by his voice that he really, really cares about this. He really wants to help individuals find their purpose and actually pursuing it. And we've all listened to his voice in some of the video lectures that are on YouTube and the interviews that he does, where he's teary-eyed. He tries to cover it up, but he can't, because he really cares about helping people.
Yeah. Jordan Peterson, I mean, he's the internet's father figure, right? Like, he's such a good man, and we're so lucky to have him. And I have a quote from this chapter, two quotes actually, that I just want to quickly share so that we could perhaps talk about them. What can I not doubt? The reality of suffering. It brooks no arguments. Nihilists cannot undermine it with skepticism. Totalitarians cannot banish it. Cynics cannot escape from its reality. Suffering is real, and the artful infliction of suffering on another for its own sake is wrong. That became the cornerstone of my belief. And then a little later he says, if the worst sin is the torment of others, merely for the sake of the suffering produced, then the good is whatever is diametrically opposed to that. The good is whatever stops such things from happening.
And he also brings up the events that happen in history, totalitarians and like the communists, the Nazis, the Maoists, and how many of them strive for intellectualism and not humility, not listening to the people. And when the people break away from that ideology, they end up suffering. They end up going to the gulags. They end up going to the concentration camps. And they often wonder why their people won't listen to them. But they refuse to admit their wrongdoing. They admit to not presenting their flaws. And I think that if we continue down this route today in our current society, if we let bias from the media, our own suffering, hold our hands and lead us down to this route, we will end up forgetting about what we were meant to do. How can I use my time to make things better instead of worse? That's another quote that he presents.
I don't really know what to say about suffering other than, you have to really accept it and almost use it as a tool for the future in the form of sacrifice. Like, suffer now so you can, have non-suffering later.
So you can prosper in the future.
Yeah. And it helps to just not see the world as suffering and feeling good. It's suffering and lack of suffering. And it's the same way to consider sin is just missing the mark. So there's, the things that you need to do, and then everything else is sin.
Jocko Willink just uploaded a clip from one of his previous interviews with Jordan Peterson, just a 2-minute clip where Jordan talks about schedules and not being a tyrant when you schedule your life, and how important it is to schedule in rewards, and says something along the lines of, if you wake up in the morning and there's 5 things you need to do, that if you don't do them tomorrow, things will be worse. Well, then you're going to have to put those in your schedule, but you're also going to have to put in things that you want to do and that you can reward yourself with doing. And like, this is something that I discuss a lot with one of my friends, because for some reason I only have one friend who's open to debating like hardcore deep dive human behavior. And just, I think yesterday we were talking about the notion of delaying gratification and not controlling yourself like a tyrant, because what happens is you revolt at a subconscious level. Like, and that's again something I struggle with, but being able to structure your life so that you want to complete your schedule and do the things that you know will make life easier, or at least more rewarding, or at least less worse. And one of the weird existential fears I have is this whole sacrificing today so that tomorrow will be greater, breeding almost an addiction to sacrificing today for tomorrow, so that eventually you hit 85 and you've spent your whole life building your future, and then you expire and everything that you've built is now passed on to your heirs. And I think that's probably how you get lots of royal families and transgenerational wealth, is because they haven't lived for themselves. They haven't taken in their bounty and truly been happy and consumed for a while. And what does that even look like? What does tomorrow look like if I've made it so much better? How do I spend my time good without falling into the trap of instant gratification and expedient satisfaction? What does that even look like?
Yeah, and he compares it to like the same kind of decisions on the global scale and like the transformation of religions over time. But how paganism was converted to Christianity, and then eventually God is dead. And one notion that he brings up is destroying an ideology instead of reforming it causes all the issues that it didn't address to become more prominent. So like as soon as Christianity took over, it solved a bunch of problems like how we deal with each other, but now we're seeing all of the problems that Christianity didn't address become problems in the 21st century.
And it's so easy to point the finger at Christianity as the cause of those problems we now see, and to forget all of the things that it did solve, which it did quite a bit for. And the destruction of those, I don't know, ancient systems of order will just create a regression to the problems that we forgot we had. And reformation is probably key, but I don't know how we'd go about that.
And that's what I think Jordan Peterson is honestly trying to do. Just opening the door for people that are morally opposed and have a really big problem with Christianity, and just letting them see like, hey, this isn't what you think it is. There is still some good stuff in here. There's a reason that this is the most famous book of all time right here.
Just take out some of the bits that work and what don't work.
Yeah, and that brings me to another quote in this chapter from Carl Jung that says, "We cannot invent our own values because we cannot merely impose what we believe on our own souls." What do you think of that one?
Well, that makes me think of the Crime and Punishment book we did, right? Like it is so true. You have certain inclinations and you can't just decide to change. That's not how change works. Change happens over millennia as drips of water hit the surface of the stone. And I think that there's something to be taken away from that notion, that while it is good to have ideals, you need to recognize who you are and what you truly value. And if you want to shift what you value, it's going to take experience, effort, and consistency. You can't just say that you're a Napoleon type, go out and kill an old pawnbroker and feel good about it. That's just not how it works. You just murdered someone. You're going to be depressed and freaking schizophrenic.
You have to properly identify who you are before you can make a big change.
It's one thing to know where you're going. It's a more important thing to know where you are. Because if you're heading south and you're actually aiming for north, but you didn't know that you were heading south because you didn't know where you are, then you're just going to be lost. You need a compass. You need to know what you value about life. You need to know what you value about work. You need to know how those two different sets of values work well together and where they oppose each other. And then you can move forward.
Yeah, like when you're navigating those dungeons in Zelda, you gotta find the compass and the map, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really cool point you just brought up, because there's so many things like that at a very subtle level, they're trying to tell you and support you and give you the resources to lead a better life, even if it's just Zelda on a Nintendo Entertainment System, getting the compass and the map. Like, what a crazy metaphor.
Yeah, that's something that we can all connect on. That's crazy, eh? All these
Yeah,
memes.
that, like, 1 point for you.
1,000 rupees for you.
I can't
Okay,
fit them all
let's-
in my wallet.
Let's not break the economy there, Pat. 1,000 rupees. What would you even buy with 1,000 rupees? That's enough rupees to power your magic armor for like 3 hours.
You can start with that.
Go get myself a giant's knife.
We all know that it takes trades and relationships to get the greatest reward.
That is true. That's another lesson learned from Zelda.
The forgotten, smelly rag from a hand in the dark can have more meaning for a cook on a lost remote island who's lost his sense of smell than at first look you would think. I think that was Oracle of Ages, Level 2 Sword Trade Quest, Part 5.
Thank you, Will. So I have one more quote from this chapter, just a short one. It says, "Maybe the world isn't at fault. Maybe it's you." And when I read that, I loved it so much. So simple. I just had to write it down.
That's a mantra.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not the world's fault. It's you.
Yeah, I think that's just something you have to say to yourself at least once a day. Like Marcus Aurelius would say, wake up every morning and ask yourself, what's your purpose? Add in, maybe it's your fault.
Honestly, the amount of problems people have with the world could boil down significantly to just perception and projection. Like the whole notion that people are terrible. How many people do you know that think people are terrible? And how terrible are those people? If you don't have boundaries, if you don't know how to communicate, if you don't know who you are, how can you possibly have a shred of hope to deal with the masses of humanity and society? Maybe it's just you.
All right, let's go for a mid-roll break.
And we're back. Hey guys, we're looking at Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. What was your biggest takeaway from this chapter, Scott and Pat?
This was another hard one to actually put into play in life, because yes, we all know that lying is a bad thing, and if you hold it in for a long time, things will get worse. But what constitutes as a lie? When is it proper to hold a lie?
The only truth a liar ever said was that lying won't get you out of your problems. Don't become the liar that knows this truth, because it is only learned through experience.
I really like the stories that he had to say, or had to tell, in this chapter. Like
I did too.
The one about his neighbor who had a drinking problem and tried to come over consistently to sell his microwave or his toaster or something, and eventually he just had to stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going to buy your microwave from you. You have to stop. You're not doing yourself any favors by selling me your microwave for another, 6-pack of beer.
And he also brings this up in his practice too, when Jordan mentions the importance of listening to clients as they talk. And sometimes you can point out some of their flaws. And yes, you can at times, not all the time, but sometimes you can point out their flaws just by speaking it. But it's more important to just listen and let it play out, especially when he dealt with I don't remember the disorder, but I think it was either OCD or paranoid schizophrenia. He had a client that had one of those things, and he just simply listened. He didn't butt in. He didn't interrupt him. He didn't say anything otherwise. He just listened.
Are you talking about the same individual with the crazy impulses where at times Jordan Peterson would just be completely truthful and say, look, that's scaring me.
Yeah.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
I think that was, and like Scott was saying with the biker, the honesty of expression and coming from a place of serious truth and compassion, to not be better than the man who has an alcoholic addiction. It's just coming from a place of support and truth and saying, look, I'm not going to enable you, and I care about you, and this is how I feel, and this is the truth of the situation, and to be grounded in that honest disposition. It's one of the hardest things you'll do is to tell the truth and to be honest with yourself first, because that's the only way you can get to a place of telling the truth.
Yeah, and how oftentimes it's enough to just disarm the situation. Because in the situation with the biker trying to sell his microwave, he was like terrified that he was going to be like angry and throw himself into a drunken rage, but he was just like, "Oh, okay, you're actually serious. I should go and take this seriously."
I think there's a lot to be said about that standoff that he had with that biker. I know for a fact that sort of nonverbal exchange between micro expressions in the face of the person that's telling you something, it goes a very long way. Like, there are many times where people have said the truth but not meant it, and it was very easy for them to cave into what they really wanted to do, even though they knew it to be negative or untowards. They knew what they ought to do, but they weren't invested in it, and they didn't carry out their true desire because of an urge to pursue the expedient.
And that's why Jordan Peterson decided to speak out against Bill C-16 a few years ago, saying, you're not going to put your new speech laws onto me. This is going to not just affect me, but it's going to affect everyone. This is a form of totalitarianism, and it's not a good idea. He had to speak out about it. And that's another thing, too, is you have to be ready for whatever impact that's going to hit you when you do decide to tell the truth. When you bring up something that you find worrisome and you want to negotiate with it, not demand it, but negotiate it.
Yeah, and that connects to a quote in one of the past chapters that just says, if you have something to say, silence is a lie.
Yeah, otherwise your default setting will just set into place and you're going to let everybody else do the work for you.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of an exchange that Jordan Peterson had with Rex Murphy that was uploaded to YouTube a week ago.
Yeah, I watched that one too.
It was a really good one. There was a lot to take out of it, but what comes to mind is after you've said something that you know to be true, and the reactionaries are always quickest to jump on you and jump right down your throat and shame you and curse you and call you out for your actions. The next step is to wait. Don't apologize. Don't back yourself up. Wait a few weeks, because the people that agree with you aren't quick to jump onto the conversation. They take a while to even get to them. And if you go around speaking your truth and then apologizing for it the minute someone says that you're wrong or intolerant, then you'll never give the opportunity to the people that support you to support you.
How much is that help worth if they're not going to take it with anything?
Yeah, like, you have to be able to stand behind what you say and be patient and calm and level-headed and non-reactionary. Just because you've offended someone with what you've said. If you're speaking the truth, that's going to come out at the end of the day. But giving yourself responsibility for other people's emotional reactions is a fallacy at the very least.
And he talks about recognizing your own vulnerabilities and how that can help you see the vulnerabilities in other people too.
It's also a way to help you grow.
I think my favorite story out of this chapter was when he was, forget the name of the university that him and a few other students were at, but they were waiting in the tunnels, and a patient had come up to them and wanted to hang out with them. And they were clearly mentally disturbed. And one of his co-students, gosh, I wonder what the word for that is, asked him, what do I say to this woman? Peers. That's a good peers. One of his peers said, geez, what do I say to this woman who's clearly mentally disturbed that we're about to go do clinical work? And he said he didn't know what to say. And he immediately thought of a couple lies he could say to this person to dissolve the situation, but that wouldn't be correct. And the truth was the way out. And it almost always is. When he said, look, we're studying and we're about to go do this thing and you can't join us, it took her a few seconds to accept it, and then she did, and they moved on with their day. And the truth will set you free, right? Like, how old is that adage?
I really like this one quote that says, if you will not reveal yourself to others, you cannot reveal yourself to yourself. Like, if you have a struggle of, revealing your own truth to some stranger who wants to hang out, then how are you going to recognize the truth to yourself?
Absolutely. Like, I'm sure everyone's had that issue where they won't be honest with the people closest to them, and they feel they're being honest with themselves, but they're not ready to open up to those others. And their issue persists, and they don't understand why it persists. They know it's an issue. They aren't telling anyone it's an issue, but they know it's an issue, and it persists and it persists. And the reality is we're an interdependent species, and we need support of others. That's how we thrive. We're not independent. We're not codependent. We're interdependent. I have resources. You have resources. Between the three of us, we make this podcast. If we each tried to do it on our own, we would not get nearly as far as we will together.
Ain't that the truth?
Yep.
Together we're much more than the sum of our parts.
And we're so much more than just the recorded podcasts. Like, we wouldn't be this far if we hadn't gotten together behind closed doors and aired our truths and offered support, or maybe not even support, just offered a listening ear and a compassionate silence that says, it's okay, you're enough, you can do better, thank you for sharing. What do you think you need to do to move forward? What are you missing? Do you need any support? And I know for a fact that my year would have not looked as successful as it currently does nearing December, looking back, without you guys and without all of those conversations that weren't recorded and weren't uploaded.
Yeah, definitely. And it's kind of hard to find those kinds of people too, especially who carry the same interests as you do, but sometimes they don't want to take it seriously, or they're just like, hey, okay, sure. But yeah, it's been tremendous nonetheless.
Yeah, I would say it's hard to find those people, but it's also easier than most people think. Because it's pretty easy to find yourself in a situation where you think you're the only person that thinks like you. There's no one else around who you could possibly connect with. Especially when you think that you have really close relationships, and then you realize that you can't connect with those friends or those family members as well as you really want to. That can really sow the seeds of doubt. So it's important to recognize that it is difficult to find people to really connect with, but it's also easier than you think.
Yeah, like, there's nothing that you've struggled with that there isn't another million people on this planet struggling with. It's very easy to not find your tribe. I'm going to use that term because it's a trending word, and there's so many algorithms and sales forces out there that are trying to sell that sort of identification with your people through branding. It's so easy to say you can't find them while also not spending any time looking for them.
And that's identical to, complaining your room is dirty and not spending any time cleaning it. It's all up to the individual. Do you guys remember the 3 cauldrons story or metaphor?
No.
Well, there was a point where I don't remember what it comes from, but there's like some old Soviet story about like some people going through hell.
Yeah, it's a dark joke.
Yeah, and he shows them the first cauldron and says, this is the Englishman, and has a bunch of devils like poking them back in. Says this is the cauldron for the Frenchman, and it's the same thing, just a boiling oil or whatever, with the devils poking them. Like anyone crawling out, they poke them so they fall back in. Then they get to the Russian cauldron, and there's no devils there at all pushing them back in, because he says that whenever someone tries to pull themselves out, there's always another one underneath pulling them back in.
Yes. I do recall that now that you brought it up.
The Englishmen and the French always see the oppressive force as the other, but for the Russians, the Soviets, they're always just fighting amongst themselves.
Well,
I have 2 more quotes that I can bring up, and then I'm out. But status you can lose, but you carry character with you wherever you go.
That's a good quote. Yeah. You end up remaining the same even when you offer something brand new.
Yeah, for me, it's just like your character and who you are as a person belongs higher up on the pedestal than any job or title that you could ever earn. Belongs at the top of the hierarchy. The other quote I have is, in paradise, everyone tells the truth. That's what makes it paradise.
Yep.
I like that quote. And he talks about it throughout all these chapters, that heaven is a place that we can get to on earth if we all were able to look at ourselves and truly analyze our dark side and our good side and our values and all of these other lessons that he's imparting.
Yes, and
Just
concrete goals versus meta goals, things like that. He goes over quite a bit.
Just how great could we get if we all tried to do better?
So did you have anything else to bring up?
Oh, no. Honestly, I think I've discussed all that I intended to discuss.
Same here.
So until next time, like, comment, subscribe, join the conversation, speak your being forward, tell the truth. How'd we piss you off today? And may the force be with you.
And equal to mass times acceleration. And finally, if we didn't piss you off, perhaps we inspired you. Comment on one of the blog posts. We'll be uploading blog posts for each of these podcasts over at our website, bookwave.club. Have a great day.
Eat more lobster.